Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. Development, particularly in the era of COVID-19, transit and a more affordable development has been an issue that I've been very interested in. We've had a couple different people on our show talking about it. So today I want you to meet Hunter Milbourne. He is the CEO and president of the Milbourne Group. The Toronto-based company has 44 years of experience in pre-construction, sales, and real estate, and has executed $35 billion in sales and strategic partnerships globally. Mr. Milbourne, thank you so much for joining us tonight. How are you?
Thanks, Brian. Very good, sir. Thank you.
So tell me, just as an overview, what you and your company does.
So our business, it's a B2B brand, and we specialize in representing the developers. Over the years, we've done both urban and resort communities, but right now we're focusing primarily on urban ones, primarily in the GTA. But we've done a lot of work in Vancouver over the years and a lot of work on different ski and golf and beach resorts. But primarily the last 10 or 15 years has been really mainly Toronto focused, just simply because the Toronto market has been kind of all encompassing and kept us pretty busy. So basically a developer will hire us right after they acquire a site, and we work with them we work with the architects, the engineers, all through the planning process, through the approval process. We kind of look at ourselves as the buyer's presence at the planning table to make sure that, the suite mix is correct, the suite sizes are correct, we've got the right amenities so that we're, on brand and on target with respect to the market and the pricing and the finishing and everything. There's a lot of decisions that get made along the way that, often the architect or the developer or the lawyers or the other disciplines aren't as close to the market as we are. So we're a pretty important cog in that wheel to, take it from the day of conception to the day it opens for sales. And then we would staff the sales office with our staff, sales and admin support people, sell out the building, get it financed and get it built, and then get it closed and go on to the next one. So, in the GTA, the 10-year average of pre-construction volume alone, not counting any resales, has varied from a low in 2018 of about 22,000 units to a high in 2017 of about 36,000 units. So in an average year, we might some years have 18%, some years 20%, some years 22%, but bouncing around that 20% market share number. So we sell a fair percentage of the GTA pre-construction. In an average year, we would sell between 18 and 22% of all the pre-construction condos sold in GTA. So it averages about 20% annually, which translates into around 4,000 on a low year and maybe 6,000, 7,000 in a busy year for us.
So you're really closer to the market than the builders are, than the developers are, because you're not only helping them with the sales, 20% market share in the sales, but you're also advising them on the planning side of things. Is that correct?
Yeah, not the approval planning side, but the planning of the buildings. Let's say, the suite mix, the sizes, the amenities, all of the
right.
Purchaser implications.
And so given COVID-19, how do you think things have changed? Have you been providing different advice to people?
A little bit. In March when it locked down, March, April, we had launched a big project on March the 5th, which was about 10 days before things locked down. It was a 700 unit project for Lanterra up around Royal York Road in Eglinton. So it was on a future transit stop. And basically, we hadn't planned for any virtual sales because everything was live in those days. And all of a sudden, 10 days later, we find ourselves, not able to meet people. So we had to make a quick pivot. And this was a big building. It was a 700 unit building. So we'd released 200 units, which in a normal world would have probably sold out in 30 days and we would have gone on to the next 200. So if you fast forward to today, we did sell those 200. It probably took about 3 or 4 months instead of a month because we didn't plan for that virtual thing. We had to do it on the fly. And then, we've released another 200 and we're about 50% sold that building as we speak. So it was successful. It just took a little bit longer. So then the first kind of during COVID that we launched was a project for Marlin Spring called Taylor. around Queensway and Islington. So it was a smaller building, about 140 units, and they had a goal to sell about 100. So this was all digital. I mean, we were prepared for it at this time. There was no sales office. There was no meeting anybody, but we did everything by virtual meetings and digital assets. And over a period of about 60 days, the goal was to sell about 100 units, which would get them to their construction financing target. And then we were going to stop. So that's basically what we did.
We're chatting tonight with Hunter Milbourne, the CEO and president of the Milbourne Group, a consultancy that advises developers on what they should be building and helps them sell it. And we're asking him what happened during COVID-19 and how the market has changed. We're going to take a break for some messages and come back more with Hunter Milbourne in just a minute. Stay with us.
Hello.
Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour, Saga 960. We're chatting tonight with Hunter Milbourne. He is the president and CEO of the Milbourne Group. It's a group that for 44 years has been advising different companies, different developers globally on what they should build, how they should build it, and then helping them to sell it. And so probably a gentleman that is pretty close to the market. Hunter, let's just roll back for a second. You said you did a fair amount of work in the GTA. I think you said between 18 and 22% market share in the GTA, but you'd also done a lot of work in recreational areas like ski resorts and things like that. Is that the case?
Yeah, Brian, we basically opened an office in Vancouver in 1990. You know, in that period of time in Toronto was going through a slow period. And so we opened up an office in Vancouver. And after a couple of years there, we moved up to open an office in Whistler. And Interwest, which was the big ski resort company at the time, was doing Whistler Blackcomb and a lot of US resorts. So we ended up starting to work with them. And over the next few years, we ended up marketing and selling different ski properties at Keystone, Copper Mountain, Solitude, Stratton, many U.S. properties, as well as Whistler, Blackcomb, Panorama in Canada. So that was an interesting period of time because it was a little more difficult than the urban environments because all your buyers in urban environments are pretty close to where they're ending up. But in the resort environments, you have to find where they are and get them to the resort first, right? So it's a little different.
So during COVID-19, there's been a lot of people that have been talking about, the world is flat. We can go anywhere. And I had an interview with Joe Barrett, Urban Strategies, last week, and he was calling us from Prince Edward County. And I had an interview with someone else who was calling from Collingwood and someone else who was calling in from Port Stanley. And so people are sort of finding that they can do work from almost anywhere. Do you think that this trend that we had over the course of the last, 10, 15 years to live more downtown has gone to a trend during COVID-19 of living in more resort settings?
Most definitely. I think that, one of the weakest submarkets lately has been downtown. I mean, the projects that we launched in the summer, June, July, and August, were Etobicoke, Mississauga. The ones we've launched recently were Scarborough. So they've been a little bit more affordable, a little bit bigger spaces. And, places like Collingwood or Muskoka are really booming right now.
Is that temporary, just as we are in the middle of this pandemic, or do you think this is going to be a long-term trend that people have gotten used to and like virtual commuting rather than real commuting?
I think it's a little bit of both. I mean, when those trends get us, and it depends how long it lasts. I mean, are we here for another 6 months or another 9 months or another year? How long before things really get back to normal, and what does normal mean? But I think that this is a big trend, and I think it's definitely, people realize that, the go-to meetings, the Zoom meetings, the virtual meetings can be efficient, and you don't have that same camaraderie, but you can accomplish a lot. And I think that those things are here to stay for a lot of people.
A bunch of the downtown condos were particularly near, Scotiabank Arena and Union Station were attracting a lot of investment buyers that were then renting them out or renting them out as Airbnb. That market seems to have gone away a lot, hasn't it?
Yes, most definitely. And those units have surfaced either for sale or for rent downtown. So there's a bigger supply. And as you get more supply, then you get a little bit of price contraction, both in the rentals and the sales downtown.
I got the impression that getting up the elevators on those big, tall condominium buildings was a challenge in regular time, in a sort of an era of social distancing or physical distancing when you can only have, 4 people per elevator. It's got to be a real problem getting just people up and down. Are developers rethinking how many elevators you need and how many floors they go to and what the system is that takes them to their specific floor?
It's funny. You should be saying yes, but we haven't really gotten into a lot of those discussions. Most of the buildings that we've been focusing on now have been mid-rise buildings, 8, 10, 12 stories, 150 to 250 units. The biggest one that we launched since March was probably 360 units. It was 19 stories. So the second biggest one was 12 stories, about 340 units. So I think there's a bit of a trend to smaller buildings and fewer floors.
What about balconies? I think that, we people weren't going to work. We were closing down parks. People didn't get as much green space and fresh air. And so many of those condos downtown didn't have balconies, or if they did, the balconies were small. I would have thought that people would have trended toward larger balconies, if not almost, big patio lounges.
No, that's correct. And I think that, that's something that, we paid more attention to. I mean, the buildings that got launched between March and let's say September, were pretty much already designed pre-COVID. Yeah. So, but the ones that are starting to get designed now that are going to launch probably in 6 months or 2 years, whenever they're approved, definitely some of that thinking is going in there for sure.
What else? So you've got elevators and you've got patios. What else? And maybe larger units, maybe less height. What other changes are you advising people to consider?
Well, just where you've got a big flat roof, like we have a little building that we're going to launch sometime in the next 90 days in Huntsville. It's right on Ferry Lake, so it has waterfront. It's walk to town. It's 5 stories. It's about 60 suites, and it's a big footprint. So it's got a very, very large roof. So there's 2 penthouses, each with their own big terraces. Most of the suites have very big, deep terraces, but there's also an enormous kind of common area terrace that looks over the lake that would be available for all residents. It's called Lakeside Muskoka. So that one is going to be very interesting because it's really, and that was just designed that way in the beginning. We didn't really design it purposefully that way, but I think that it's poised to do very well. It's had a very good reaction in terms of the pre-advertising, and I think that should do exceptionally well.
Why would one want to go to Muskoka where you're supposed to get away from it all and still live in a condominium?
Well, listen, I think that it's a good question. I mean, I think there's the target markets there are local people who live in the town that really want to downsize and retire. There's also a city market. So there's some of the 705 people who are local. And then there's the 416, 905, 519 people that really would love to have, let's call it a single family cottage. But given those prices, they've said, look, if we want to be on the water and we don't have $2 million, then maybe this is our best option.
What other changes do you think are happening?
I think that one of the changes that we saw was that from last year to this year, prices went up. So there's no bargains, but the deposit structures, because when you're buying one of these pre-construction condos, it's typically 3, 4, 5 years down the road. And, most of historically, those deposits were about 20% over a period of a year, maybe a little more than a year. So, what the feedback we got from customers and the selling brokers was that people were almost more sensitive to the terms than the price. So in most of those launches that we did in the last 6 or 7 months, the deposits were a total of 15%, and they were stretched out a little further. I mean, most developers and lenders want to have at least 10% in before the construction would start, so that we were mindful of when that would happen. But it was typically a 15% deposit instead of 20%, and stretched out a little bit further.
Is that because mainly investors are buying the units rather than people that are going to live there?
No, it was really almost the reverse. I think what we found with after COVID, there was probably fewer investors and more users.
Really?
By the nature of a pre-construction, because it's such a long delivery, it always attracted a good percentage of investors. And in a lot of places that could have been 60-40 in favor of investors. But what we found in these last few launches that we did, it was almost the other way around in favor of users.
Maybe we can take a step back and we can talk a little bit about this market, because maybe not a lot of my listeners are familiar with it. So pre-construction condominium investment, you number one, you put down a deposit, and then when do you come up with the full amount of the purchase price?
Yeah, typically, if you wanted to use an example, let's say you're buying something, let's say it's a $600,000 condominium residence. So if it's a 15% deposit, that would be $90,000. You'd pay $5,000 or $10,000 with the agreement, the balance up to 5% in 30 days, maybe another 5% in 6 months, another 5% in a year or a year and a half. So it's in stages. Let's say 15%, which would be 90,000 over a year and a half, and your delivery could be 3-4 years out. So the appeal with people is if you've got a market that's appreciating, even if it's modest, if it's appreciating 3 or 4% a year for 3 or 4 years, even without compounding, that $600,000 asset, if it's 3%, could be up, 10%, or if it's 4%, could be up 12%. So your appreciation is on the asset price, not on the deposit amount. So the returns on the deposit can be quite good.
So it's almost like you're buying an option on real estate appreciation.
Yeah, the only fact is it's not it's actually a fully documented purchase, but there's very few people that don't close because even if their circumstances change, they get divorced, they get married, they need something bigger, they need something smaller. They can't move into what they bought in the first place, or they're an investor in the first place and they want to rent it. But because there's been great appreciation over the last 10 years, there's very few people that don't close. Even if someone passes away, there's an estate that would close it because it's usually more advantageous to close it than to give it back, right?
So on a $600,000 condo, you put down the $90,000. You did that over the course of a couple of different installments. And then when do you have to come down with the $510,000 to close? On closing?
When it's finished. Yeah.
And then I understand there's an issue on HST if you don't live in it. Tell me about the implications of HST versus investment versus moving in yourself.
Yeah, well, there's two ways to get the HST rebate. One is if you move into it and then you get your HST rebate. Number two is that for the governments to foster long-term tenancies, if you rent it for a minimum term of a year, then you also get the HST rebate. So the only way you wouldn't get the HST rebate is if you flipped it, if you assigned it, or if you rented it for a shorter period than 1 year.
So if you flip it within the year.
Yeah.
Okay. And then I think that this is primarily, you're saying a something that people that want to move into it buy, some investors buy. Is this usually sort of the professional investor, or is this everybody that's buying these pre-construction condos?
Listen, I think it's both. Because of the fact that a lot of people over the years have bought these investments and they've done well with them, and they've closed them and rented them, and now they've got their mortgage covered by rent, and they've done well and they've built up equity, then they've continued to purchase. But there's always new investors that come out and they just say, look, I think I'd rather own a piece of real estate than put money in the stock market, because I want to have something I can kind of touch and feel, and I feel more comfortable with that. So. And
then the other issue I often hear about it is whether you get charged for an assignment or not. Tell me what that is.
Well, listen, it's not, usually in the agreement of purchase and sale, there's a condition that the developer would have that they don't want people assigning until the building is 95% sold, because they don't want people to compete with their sales. But let's say a building's sold out and the purchaser wants to assign before closing. They can do that provided they get the consent of the developer and usually pay a fee to the developer. So, but it's a, it's something then you kind of waive your right to that HST rebate. And even if you're making a lot of money, it's still, it happens maybe with a small percentage of, most people who purchased them originally end up closing them and either move in or rent for a year so that they want to get that HST rebate.
We're chatting tonight with Hunter Milbourne. He is the president and CEO of the Milbourne Group, a consultancy that advises developers on buildings in the GTA, and it sounds like in a lot of resort locations, or at least historically he has. We're going to take a break for some messages and come back more with Hunter in just a minute. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. We're chatting tonight with the president and CEO of the Milbourne Group, a gentleman by the name of Hunter Milbourne. He's been in the business for a couple of decades, consulting with companies, with developers on what they should build, how many suites, what should go into the suites, both in the GTA as well as in resort settings. Hunter, what's happened over the course of the last, decade, 2 decades in regards to the sort of the composition of what people want in the GTA? You've got a movement downtown. You've got a movement away from single family dwellings to condos. You've got the impact of the Greenbelt. Tell me what you think of what sort of has happened in the last 2 decades in the 2000s.
Thanks, Brian. Yeah, it's been very interesting. I mean, I think that one thing that's been relatively consistent is the number of new homes that has been created in Toronto for the last 20 odd years. And it's been fluctuating between 40,000 and about 45,000. CMHC came out with studies that said that the city really needs, based on its net in-migration, both foreign and domestic, the city needs about 50 to 55,000 homes per year to stay as a balanced market.
So we're underbuilding the number of homes.
Well, and that's one of the reasons why you've had this good, significant appreciation. So in the early 2000s, the province woke up and said, well, you can't keep eating up this farmland in 905 and building and sprawling. So they implemented the Greenbelt legislation, which really severely restricted the supply of single family development land. And pre-Greenbelt, there was about 2/3 of that 40 to 45,000 annual home volume that was low rise, both single family and townhomes, and about 1/3 condominiums. And as that single family supply got restricted and choked off, between 2005 and 2015, every year there were fewer and fewer new singles and more new condos, to the point where by 2015, that 2/3, 1/3 balance from low rise to high rise had completely reversed itself. And that 2/3 of the new homes that were sold were now condominiums because they were affordable.
The quote I heard was that there were more cranes in Toronto than any other city in North America. Was that right?
It's actually even more important. There's a cost consulting company called Ryder Bucknell that does this annual study called King of Cranes. And if I can remember the statistics correctly, I think Toronto had 127 cranes, which was more than the next 4 cities, which was Calgary, Vancouver, Chicago, and San Francisco. It's just, Toronto is really blessed with an amazing net in-migration every year and a growing real estate market. So, there's more cranes here. 30% of the cranes in the top 14 cities studied were in Toronto.
The other trend that I think we mentioned earlier on was that 70% of those condos were within a mile or something like that of a transit stop. So very transit-oriented development. Is that not the case?
Yeah, I think the stat was that about 60% of the new condo development was within a kilometer of a transit stop over the last 10 years.
What do you think about that? Will that change? Will people's interest in transit and or living close to transit change?
I don't think so. I think transit is a ingrained thing in the city, and it's an easy and inexpensive way to get around. And it's had its challenges with COVID, but so is everything else. And I think that eventually that'll pass, right?
So how did the Greenbelt get instituted and impact these trends that you're talking about?
Well, when the province passed that Greenbelt legislation, my first reaction was that, it's government's interfering with private enterprise and it wasn't such a good idea. But upon reflecting, I think what they've done is they've preserved this Greenbelt around the city. So it pushed the market out further into 705 or in closer into 416. But what it did do also was really increase the price of single family homes because supply was restricted. And it really gave a significant impetus to the condominium market.
So we wouldn't have had all these downtown condos, you don't think, naturally, if it hadn't been for the institution of the Greenbelt?
I think that was a bigger fact because I think that other things being equal, many people would prefer a single family home to a condo, but if it becomes out of reach and they can't afford it and they want to own something, then they either have to go further out or they have to own a condominium. Those are the two choices.
There were a lot of people thinking that when Doug Ford got elected premier, that he was going to do away with the Greenbelt and allow developers to start building in the Greenbelt. And I had one consultant that came on my show that told me that there's this gray belt that he described it around, I guess in the suburbs of the 416 and or in the 905, that he said is an area of development that is inside the Greenbelt, but that the density and zoning on it is dramatically less than approved by the Places to Grow legislation. And so therefore what we should be doing is increasing the density inside the Greenbelt and not necessarily in condos downtown, but just in Mississauga and Scarborough and Rexdale and North York, et cetera. What do you think of that?
Well, I think that that's happening in a way already, because like there's a new big transit line that's going up Highway 10 from Lakeshore right almost to Highway 7 in Brampton. So, a lot of the new projects that we have over the next few years, one that we launched in July, one that we launched in August, we're basically one at Port Credit to Go Station at the base of that new LRT, and one at here Ontario and Dundas. So I think that those call it Mississauga downtown projects are really in favor. They're less expensive than the 416 ones, and they did exceptionally well from a point of view of being received by the public. The one that opened in July was called Westport, and it was at the Port Credit Go Station at the foot of that new LRT. It's 100% sold as we speak at the end of October. And the other one at here Ontario and Dundas was called Artform, and it's about 85% sold. And they were sizable projects, 360 and 340 units respectively. So I think that that it gives credence to the transit idea, but it also kind of reinforces that theory of things decentralizing a little bit. So,
you've got this impact of the interest in moving downtown, the inflow of people, the building of condominiums that led us to a situation where you had more cranes than the next four cities. But then with COVID-19, you said that people were moving more to single-family homes, moving away from downtown, and prices have come down as people have put more units on the market. What do you think is going to happen in the future? Are we going to move back downtown? And if we are, then this creates a buying opportunity. We should be going in and buying some of those downtown condos because they're going to come back in a year's time. Or is the trend to the suburbs and to single family and to resort locations going to continue because we've all moved and like it?
Listen, you know what I think? I think you're going to have both of those things happening at the same time. I guess anybody's guess is to what extent, because I think that decentralization trend, once it's started, is going to keep going for the next 2 or 3 years. But I think that also, once things get back to normal, I think you'll see a big resurgence in downtown because people want to be near the restaurants and near their places of work. But because people will be working more remotely, you're going to see that decentralization trend. So I think you're going to have both things happening at the same time. It'll just be a question of to what extent.
Is downtown going to be as exciting? I think with these closures that we've had and that we're now having again, there's going to be so many restaurants that have challenges, go under, or struggling financially. I can't imagine how the theaters and the live concert venues are surviving at all. What do you think is going to happen to the dynamism of downtown?
Listen, I think eventually it's going to return, but it's going to be probably a slow process. It may not happen in 6 months or a year. It may take a little longer, because there was, when things close like that, it's going to take a while for that activity to recover, right?
But you're pretty confident it will.
I think it will. Yeah, I think that, people still like to be together. And I think that there's always a new group of, millennial aged people that want to move downtown and have fun and work. And and I guess also we haven't had that immigration boost that the city always gets. So, whether it's 80,000 or 120,000 or 150,000 people, there's a lot of people that move to Toronto each year from domestic places and from foreign places. So, we've been without that now for 6 or 7 months. So, when that returns, that's going to be another shot in the arm.
So you have been in the business a couple of decades. You've seen a bunch of different trends, a trend sort of away from downtown and towards suburbia, a trend to buying all these resort towns, Collingwood and Tremblant and things like that, a trend going back downtown and to condominiums that are tiny in size, 500, 800 square feet. What do you think the trends that you're going to see in the next 5-10 years are going to be?
I think that there was a statistic that came out that the under 500 square foot units downtown were depreciating in price, but the over 500 square foot ones were appreciating in price. So I think there was a little bit of pushback on very small units. So I think you probably see smaller or fewer really small units. I mean, there was a push to create really small units because they were more affordable. So I think that's going to change a little bit. But I think that there's still going to be a great demand for Toronto real estate. And if you think of what happened to prices over the last 6 or 8 months, because people were more focused on their home, prices in 2020 were higher year over year than prices last year, which, someone said if the global pandemic can't slow down the increase of prices in Toronto real estate, what will? So I think that's a real testimonial to the strength of the market when you lose, demand of hotels and restaurants and immigration, and you still have prices that are holding steady. That's a real testimonial to the desirability of the city.
Okay, so let me challenge you there for a second. So, during March, April, I understand that, the spring market that typically happens just didn't happen. Sales were down like 80%. So sales, not prices, but sales. And then what ended up happening is the supply came back. So was it just pent up demand and lack of supply that kept the price up, or is it something else?
Listen, I think there's that supply and demand is really what ends up setting the price. So I think a lot of it was the market that usually would have happened March, April, May happened June, July, August. So to your point, I think that for sure that happened, and things have slowed a little bit in September and October since we've started to experience this second wave. So the sites that we have that are pre-selling are still selling well, but they're not selling quite as well as they were, let's say, between June and August.
You think about how many people are unemployed, how many restaurants are closing down or going bankrupt, and retail stores that every day or week, it seems like there's another retail chain that announces it's closing down. Air Canada that says that their business is off 90%, Metrolinx and Go and TTC that say their business is off 80%. With all of this and GDP growth that's negative for the first time since 2008, 2009. Given all that, how can prices in real estate go up?
Listen, it's a good question. They may flatten out, they may drop, but it's hard to know what the future is. And again, a lot of it depends on, I think, how long this pandemic will last. If it lasts a long time, it could have a dampening effect. But I think that, most of the condominiums that get sold in the city are affordable, whether they're downtown in 416, outer 416, inner 905, outer 905. But, the vast majority of those pre-construction condos are between $400,000 and $800,000. They're not millions of dollars like the single family home. So, because they're affordable and because there's such a desire for home ownership, I think that those affordable condos are going to be insulated a little bit from, they may not go up as fast in price, but I don't think that they'll depreciate just because, there's only so many sites that you can build on. It takes longer to get approved. It's difficult. So I think that as long as the affordable units can be created, then there'll be a demand for them.
We're chatting tonight with Hunter Milbourne, who is the head of the Milbourne Group, a consultancy to real estate developers of condominiums and other developments. We're going to take a break for some messages and come back with some concluding comments in just a minute. Stay with us. Well, we're back talking about where to live, condominium development, home development, what's happening in the GTA with Hunter Milbourne, the president and CEO of the Milbourne Group, a consultancy that advises developers on what they should be building. Hunter, I talked to one property owner the other day who said that they haven't reopened their gym because of COVID-19. They were really worried about cleanliness. Gyms were being forced to close. They thought that they had to, spend more than they ever got in value for cleaning of the gym. What do you think is going to happen with amenities in condominiums?
Well, most municipalities have a requirement that typically 2 square meters per apartment. So if it's a 100-unit building or 50-unit building or a 500-unit building, so we won't be eliminating indoor amenities, but they may shift. I mean, there's been a bit of a trend in the last few years away from wet amenities because they're expensive to create and expensive to maintain. So not as many pools, not as many saunas, not as many steam rooms, not as many change rooms. They've been more yoga facilities, shared work facilities, WeWork type things. So there's been an evolution of the types of amenities, but I think that the ratio of amenity space to the saleable area space probably won't change because it's municipally required, both indoor and outdoor.
There was a couple of developments in the Yorkville area that I understand appealed and gotten a lower requirement on the number of parking spaces they needed because they said everyone was using transit. What do you think is going to happen with requirements for parking?
Well, listen, that's been a trend that's been available, since the mid '80s. I mean, I think it was mid '80s that we sold the very first building in the city that didn't have one-to-one parking ratio. And I thought to myself, how are we going to be able to ever sell an apartment without a parking spot? And now we've sold, residential communities, particularly in a dense area downtown. I mean, if it's a 4-building complex that has 1,000 or 1,200 units, it might only have 50% parking. So half the units wouldn't have a parking spot. And, there's car shares, there's Ubers, there's different ways for people to get around, and it's quite acceptable now. So the city's relaxing on that. So I think that's a trend that's here to stay. There's a few buildings that have been built without parking at all. So I think that's a trend that started many years ago that's accelerated. And, because you've got such a great transit system here, whether it's streetcars or buses or subway or LRT, that, people can move without necessarily owning the car.
What about bike racks and bike lockers and charging stations for electrical cars? Is that all happening?
Yeah, well, the city has increased the requirements for those, and the demand for those has gone up as well. So it's been kind of a simultaneous process. While the number of individual car parking spots have gone down, those car shares and bike storage and racks have increased.
So one of the reasons why, in addition to COVID-19 and people working from home, that, I think people have moved farther out of downtown is that gas prices are so low. And I think that, there's been a lot of statistics that suggest that, your desire for suburban home ownership is very predicated on the cost of fuel. What do you think your advice would be to a young married couple just starting out? What should they be doing? Should they be buying a downtown condo and save on gas and save on price, or should they be buying something in the suburbs?
Well, what comes to my mind, there's an old saying in that you can't outsave real estate. So the one advice I would give them is to buy something, But I think it's really a personal lifestyle choice because, whether someone opts to buy a house in Guelph and commute, or whether they opt for that more downtown lifestyle where they might not have a car and they're more transit focused. It depends if it's a couple with kids, it's a couple without kids. So there's many different permutations and combinations. But I think that, people have to decide for themselves what's going to work best. And, some people make a decision and then change their mind and go back to the opposite. So there's people moving from suburbs downtown and people moving from downtown to suburbs. A lot of it is influenced by kids because the kids will definitely fare a little bit better in a more single family or environment. But, we're becoming, like it or not, a little bit more like Manhattan where, you're going to have kids that live in condos and grow up in condos and buy a condo themselves and may never live in a house, whereas their parents or grandparents may never have lived in an apartment.
Right. If there was one thing you could change in the way that city government influences what you can build, what would that be?
I don't know that it would be what, but it might be the timing, because the average time over the last 10 years for a project to get approved has gone from 2 years to 4 years. So the things that a developer has to go through to get a project approved, and if the city wants and everybody wants more affordable housing, if you think of a developer carrying a big piece of land, or obviously if it takes 4 years to get approved instead of 2 years, there's a lot more costs. There's still a profit margin that's required, so the purchaser ends up really paying for that delay. So I would think that the best thing the cities could do is to figure out a way to streamline the approval process to make it happen quicker, as opposed to take so long.
Why has it gone from 2 years to 4 years? Is it just bureaucracy? Is it lack of hiring? Is it we just want to put things through red tape?
I'm not sure, but I mean, that's not my primary area of expertise. I'm just kind of an innocent bystander and a witness to it. But it might be a good, for the planners of the world to chat. And I think it is just it's more bureaucracy. It's more development charges. It's longer and a more expensive process to find a site and to take it through an approval process. The actual reasons or how to fix it, I'm not sure.
You spent a fair amount of time working in this resort development. Should I buy in Collingwood? Is it going to continue going up?
Listen, I think Collingwood is a great Four Seasons destination, and we have some investments in Collingwood, and Collingwood and Muskoka are within 2 to 2.5 hours of the GTA, and I think those are markets that have prospered over the years, and now are prospering even more.
I was surprised there hasn't been more development like that in Niagara on the Lake area.
That's a good point. I mean, we have some investments there as well. And I think that's an area that, because it's maybe a little bit more casino focused and wine focused, with Collingwood, you have the skiing, you have the Georgian Bay, same with Muskoka, you have the lake. So I think it's a little bit more recreational. But it's definitely the appreciation of the real estate in the Niagara region. Hamilton, Niagara has really gone a lot in the last 2 years, capitalizing on this development trend. We have a couple of big projects that we're going to launch next year in Hamilton, where they've been, pretty quiet and dormant for the next few years. So I think that, the Niagara Peninsula is probably next.
So my dad used to tell me there's no better investment than real estate over the last, 100 years. Is it going to continue to be a great investment?
Well, they used to say buy land because they're not making it anymore, and that was before Dubai started creating their own islands. But I think that's still, a good philosophy. I often quote, Warren Buffett, who's supposed to be the world's best investor, and he has 2 rules for investing. I don't know if you know what the 2 rules are.
No, what are they?
So rule number 1 is don't lose your money. And rule number 2 is see rule number 1. So I always thought that was quite interesting, because here's a guy who's supposed to be the world's best investor, who you would think that would involve a lot of strategy and a lot of offense. But here, this is like a completely defensive program, right? I mean, just don't do something stupid. Don't lose your money. And I think that if the average person goes into the stock market, it's one thing to be Warren Buffett and to be extra smart and be the world's best investor in the stock market, but it's harder for people to invest in the stock market and not lose. I mean, if you talk to 100 people and you ask them a question, what did you make money on and what did you lose money on? I don't think the majority of them would say they lost money on real estate, but you'll find some that would say they lost money in the stock market just because it's a more volatile and different game. So I think that the corollaries that I would say is, buy a piece of real estate, don't buy more than you can afford, and don't sell it at the wrong time. And if you do that, then you won't be losing. And so by default, you'll be winning, right?
Hunter Milbourne, President and CEO of the Milbourne Group, thank you so much for joining us tonight on the Brian Crombie Radio Wire.
Thank you, Brian.
Appreciate it. Well, that's our show for tonight. I come to you every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 AM or streamed online at saga960am.ca, or you can get all my podcasts and video casts on my website, briancrombie.com. Have a great evening, everyone. Good night.